Jerry.
Hi, Joan.
How you doing?
Pretty good.
Pretty good, not great.
Okay, great.
Are you happy?
Oh, I'm delighted.
Okay, have a nice day.
You too.
Hi, Jerry.
Hey. Ah, well, thank you very much.
For what?
For putting my picture up on that wall. I'm like Richard Dawson down there now. And every person I see engages me in this long, boring, tedious conversation. I can't even get out of the building.
You should be thanking me for liberating you from your world of loneliness and isolation. Now you're part of a family.
But maybe some of you guys come for the entertainment or the great music, right? Or maybe it's because your wife or girlfriend or significant other kind of drags you in here. And I've actually seen the heel marks in the parking lot as some of you have been drug in here. But I would guess that some of you actually come here or actually attend church for the same reasons that I started going to church. Life had beat the crap out of me. You know, my life was empty. You know, and I just felt like I was always chasing that carrot on the stick. You know, kind of chasing the next best thing, whether it was a place to live or a relationship or a new job, whatever it was that I was chasing, but it never came. Have any of you kind of felt like that? Yeah. So eventually in my life, I just got tired. I got worn out. I just got broken down. And so I decided to try church. I thought I'd try something new. Now, I have to let you know that my church experience prior to that was very limited. So when I was a kid, in grade school, I'd go to church with my parents, and that church didn't have this great Kids Quest program like we have. So as a kid, you had to sit in the church service with your mom and dad. And my memory of what church was like as a kid was a bunch of old people listening to an old guy in a bathrobe talk about a bunch of old people in the Bible. And so I remember the biggest struggle was actually staying awake. My mom and dad wouldn't let me fall asleep while I was sitting there with them. So once I got old enough where I had other activities going on and things like that, and my parents allowed me to make the choice, I didn't go to church. So when I had kids in my late 20s, early 30s, I decided I would go to church again because that's kind of what you do when you have kids, supposed to go to church. And so we found this church that would actually let you wear blue jeans to church, which I thought, hey, this can't be all bad. That's kind of cool. You don't have to dress up, go to church. The problem was that I found out I was going to hell every 3 out of 4 Sundays when I went to this church. And apparently, a lot of people there didn't know that because he would yell really loud to make sure we understood it. And so I quit going altogether, you know. So when I decided to actually try to go back to church again after my life had just beaten me up so bad, it was kind of a big deal. You know, it was kind of like, all right, I'm going to do this church thing again. And it was a big deal because I was really desperate. I was desperate for something different. And I remember going to church and I heard these 2 verses that really made a big impact on me. And if you have a Bible today, we're going to look at these 2 verses. They're going to be in the New Testament of the Bible. And if you don't know this, the Bible is actually broken up into 2 sections. One is the Old Testament of the Bible, and one is the New Testament of the Bible. The Old Testament is actually about life on earth before Jesus came. And the New Testament of the Bible is actually about life on earth after Jesus came. And if you don't have a Bible, that's right. We've got free, easy-to-read Bibles back there on the bookshelf, and you can grab one, take it with you. Or if you have our Gateway Branson app, you can actually go to the link to the YouVersion Bible. And if you don't want to do that, don't have anything on your phone or anything, it's no big deal. We're going to put the words up on the screen. So I want to share with you the two verses that kind of made an impact in my life. And we're going to look in the New Testament in the book of Matthew, chapter 11, verse 28. It says, "Then Jesus said, 'Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest.'" And I heard that and I thought, man, I was tired. I was exhausted. You know, I had a wife that had been killed in a car accident. I had another wife that had had an affair and left me. I had kids that were kind of messy, had all kinds of issues. I felt like I was trying to keep up with what the world said success was, you know, and I just couldn't do it any longer. So when I heard this Jesus guy say that he could give me rest, I thought, wow, maybe I ought to learn a little bit more about this. Maybe I should see what else this guy has to say. And so the second verse that really caught my attention and really kind of made me want to check more out about church. It was also in the New Testament. It was in the book of John in chapter 10, verse 10, and it said, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full." You know, and I felt my life had been stolen. You know, things were not working out like I had envisioned when I was younger, right? I thought I would be on top of the corporate ladder and be successful. I thought I'd have the family with the white picket fence. You know, I didn't have any of that. And I think deep down inside, I really wanted purpose. I really wanted to feel like I was making a difference. I didn't know what that looked like, but I knew that I wanted a life to the full. So this Jesus guy, he was promising rest and a full life. It's like, now you got my attention, all right? I mean, I haven't heard you tell me I'm going to hell 3 out of 4 Sundays. You're telling me the things that I want to hear, rest and a full life. So I started attending church on a regular basis. But here's the thing. No matter how much I attended church, my life really wasn't changing that much. You know, I didn't get it. I tried really hard. I got nothing. And they kept talking about this relationship with Jesus. I didn't get it. I didn't get it. And I see some of you guys nodding your head going, I know what you're talking about. See, the problem was, I thought that attending church would change my life. That it would give me the much needed rest and the purpose and the fullness that I was looking for. What I discovered was there's so much more to a relationship with Jesus than just attending church. You know, I've always wanted to play guitar. Even in junior high, I actually talked my parents into paying for guitar lessons from the stoner college kid in the neighborhood, you know, so I could be cool by playing electric guitar. What I found out was no matter how often I went to the guitar lessons, if I didn't practice and apply what he was teaching me in between those lessons, I never got any better. And so I quit the guitar. You know, and I think a lot of us attend church like that. You know, we come every Sunday or as often as we can, and we listen to a message about how our life could be better. And then we come back the next week and nothing's changed. And then maybe some of us go to a different church, and we think if we go to this other church, it'll change. Or maybe we just quit going to church altogether. And it's crazy when you think about it, right? Because we don't do that with other things. It's not like I go, oh man, if I have Kansas City Chiefs tickets and I go to every NFL football game, I'll become an NFL player. We don't do that, but we do it with church. You know, Jesus actually addresses this in the New Testament of the Bible. In the book of Luke, chapter 6, verse 46, Jesus says, so why do you keep calling me Lord, Lord, when you don't do what I say? In other words, why do you think you'll be able to play the guitar if you don't practice and apply the teachings? Or why do you think your life will change just by attending church if you don't practice and apply the teachings? You know, in Branson, it seems like we have a lot of meetings. A lot of meetings for social issues like poverty, like substance abuse, like mental illness, health and wellness. And a lot of times I get to be invited to these meetings and we get to sit around and try to brainstorm solutions for these meetings, these issues in our community at these meetings. And oftentimes I just leave frustrated because it seems like we just talk about the issues and we never start doing anything about the issues. It's like we have a meeting just to have meetings. But recently, I was invited to a new meeting, and it's kind of got me excited. It's a meeting about how to radically address the brokenness in our community. And what I like about it is that I don't think it's a hard solution. I don't think it's complex. I think we sometimes think because we have an issue that it's got to be a hard solution and we overthink things. In this case, I believe the solution to address the brokenness in our community actually comes from the Bible. And it's real simple. It's love. It's what changed my life, and it's what made a relationship with Jesus real for me. You know, 2,000 years ago, during the time of Jesus, people struggled with this same concept. In fact, there was a group of religious leaders back then. They were called Pharisees. They were like these real staunch religious elite people. And they didn't like Jesus because Jesus would go and talk about and teach about love being more important than religious rules. And so Jesus was actually kind of making these religious people look bad because they had been teaching for generations that rules were more important than love. And so they would do this almost sometimes to the point where people would suffer or hurt because it was more important for them to keep the rule than it was to love them. And so these religious leaders would always try to get into a debate with Jesus when he was teaching publicly. They wanted to catch him in some sort of contradiction to what the Bible said, what Scripture said, what God said about the religious rules. And so what they were trying to do was make him look bad. They were trying to discredit him so that when he'd do these teachings, if they could trap him in this lie, then Jesus could no longer claim to be the person he said he was, which was the Son of God and Savior of our world. So today, I want us to look at one of these stories where these religious people are trying to trap him, and Jesus points out love. And so we're going to hang out in the New Testament of Luke in chapter 10, verse 25 through 28. So let me read that for you. One day, an expert in religious law stood up to test Jesus by asking him this question: "Teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus replied, "What does the law of Moses say? How do you read it?" The man answered, "You must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your strength, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "Right," Jesus told him. "Do this, and you will live." So I love the way Jesus does things. So here's this expert in religious law. He's one of these, Pharisees, one of these staunch religious guys. And he's trying to test Jesus by asking him a question. And notice how Jesus responds. He asks a question back. See, he knew what the religious leaders were up to. When they would engage him in conversation, he would always turn the tables kind of back on them. In fact, Jesus is actually asked 183 questions in the Gospels, which is the 4 books of the New Testament. But he actually asks 307 questions. So he gets asked these questions, and he turns around and asks almost twice as many, for every one. And do you know how many questions Jesus actually answers directly? Does anybody know that? Shout it out if you think you know. 3. How should we pray? What is the greatest commandment? And are you a king? So how come Jesus asked all these questions? How come he only answered 3 directly? Because he knew asking questions caused people to think. They would come up with the answers themselves. They would be engaged in the conversation more. They wouldn't just be listening to, right? They would be kind of thinking through the conversation. So Jesus asks this expert and religious guy back, what does the law of Moses say? And just so you know, the law of Moses is commonly referred to as the first 5 books of the Old Testament. It's in one of these books, actually the book of Exodus, where we find the 10 Commandments, which is really the Christian rules to live by. So this guy knew that the law of Moses commanded him to love God and to love his neighbor as himself, right? Jesus affirms that this guy knows his stuff. He tells him, you're right. But then he says, do this and you will live. Kind of implying like he's not doing it, right? He says, do this and you will live. You wouldn't say that if you knew the guy was doing it. So this is where I think Jesus just has a great sense of humor, He's telling him that if he would actually practice and apply this law, that he would have a full life to the full. So you can kind of catch the tone here. This guy gets a little miffed, and we're going to go to verse 29. And so he kind of asks Jesus in a smart alecky way in verse 29 this. He says, the man wanted to justify his actions, so he asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? And, you can just picture this, and Jesus is probably going like, oh, no, you didn't. You didn't just go there. Oh, you did. All right. So we see Jesus kind of do this all throughout the Bible with these staunch religious people. Now, before we go into the story, I need you to understand kind of the context of where we're at. So Jesus is going to answer that guy's question with a story of his own. But you have to understand what's going on in the culture at that time. So the Jewish people, they are really considered to themselves to be better than anybody else because they are God's chosen people. And if you're not of pure Jewish blood, you are considered kind of less than by them. So think of it like this. We used to have this guy from Gateway, Austin, by the name of Rick Shirts. And we called him Flip Shirts. But I'm going to be Whiteboard Brian. So think of it like this. So you have this part of land down here we'll call Hollister. And this is where all of the purebred Hollister people, the Abraham Hollister was the original founder, and he's the father of Hollister. And if you were not one of those, you were called a Gentile. So you had the Jews who were pure blood, and then you had the Gentiles. Now, they did, a lot of times the Jews did business in another section of land where the Gentiles lived. We'll call this Harrison. So you have Hollister, where the elite people live, and then you have Harrison, where they go and they do some business and maybe had a few relatives move over there. Well, over time, what happens is you can't stop love, right? Everybody agree with that? Right? You can't stop love. So some of these Hollister people fall in love with some of these Harrison people, and they end up having kids. And we're going to call the offspring of those kids Omaha. Which is actually Samaria in our story here. All right, so the people from Hollister, I mean, they despised Omaha people. And they despised Omaha people more than they despised the Harrison people because they wore mixed blood. They had some of the Jewish blood in them. So this is a level of hatred that far exceeded probably anything we know. So much so that if they had to do business in Harrison now, they would travel all the way to Eureka Springs to go through Eureka so that they would not set foot in Omaha. I mean, it was just crazy. They would go crazy out of their way to do that. So do you guys understand that level of hatred there? I mean, it's really deep, right? So now this expert in religious law is testing Jesus. And he gets smart and he says, okay, who is my neighbor? So Jesus begins to tell this story. A Jewish man was traveling from Jerusalem down to Jericho, and he was attacked by bandits. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him up, and left him half dead beside the road. By chance, a priest came along. But when he saw the man lying there, he crossed to the other side of the road and passed him by. A temple assistant walked over and looked at him lying there, but he also passed by on the other side. Now, let me pause there real quick for you to understand what's happening here. For Jesus to use these characters to tell this story of a Jewish man being passed by Jewish leaders, by a Jewish priest and a Jewish temple assistant, was outrageous, right? This would have been really kind of shocking to this religious expert guy. It's kind of like Jesus is getting ready to do a wrap-off, and do a big mic drop on him. He's kind of setting him up in this story. So we'll go on. In verse 33, it says, "Then a despised Samaritan came along," or Omaha, "and when he saw the man, he felt compassion for him. Going over to him, the Samaritan soothed his wounds with olive oil and wine and bandaged them. Then he put the man on his own donkey and took him to an inn where he took care of him. The next day he handed the innkeeper 2 silver coins, telling him, 'Take care of this man. If his bill runs higher than this, I'll pay you the next time I'm here.'" It's like, boom, mic drop, right? That's what Jesus is doing at the end of this story. He had to have the absolute full attention now of this expert in religious law. This guy would have been totally drawn into the story because he used those religious leaders. And through this story, he probably viewed that wounded man as just an object for discussion or debate with Jesus, right? But now he's kind of dropped that mic by pulling in a Samaritan. And just look how Jesus does this story. He really sets this up well. So the bandits in this story, they kind of view the wounded man as just an object to exploit, right? Just to steal and rob from him. The priest in this story viewed the wounded man as a problem to avoid. right? Because he would have been deemed unclean if he helped that guy. And the temple assistant, he kind of viewed the guy with a little bit of curiosity, but he didn't have time to really go any further and just moved on down the path. Only the hated, lowly Samaritan treated him as a person to love. But see, Jesus isn't done yet. Look what Jesus asks the legal expert next in verse 36. Which of these three would you say was a neighbor to the man who was attacked by bandits? The man replied, the one who showed him mercy. Then Jesus said, yes, now go and do the same. You know, to this legal expert, the person least likely to act correct would have been the Samaritan. In fact, when he answers Jesus, he doesn't even use the word Samaritan in his answer. You know, this expert's attitude really betrayed the very thing that Jesus had asked him earlier about what the commandment was, and that was to love. So how come we still struggle with that today? How come we still struggle to love our neighbor? You know, I think it goes back to our own selfishness. You know, as we see in this story, to really love someone, you've got to be intentional. I mean, that was the whole point of the story. We have to make time for them, even if it inconveniences us. You know, loving others is putting into practice and action the things we hear and applying it. And by doing that, it changes us from the inside out. I mean, it's what changed me. You know, and there was a study done to kind of see if this was really true, if this really played out. In 1973, two guys, one by the name of John Darley and another by Daniel Batson, they were Princeton University psychologists. And they conducted a social experiment inspired by this story of the Good Samaritan. Darley and Batson met with a group of Princeton seminary students. These were students that were studying the Bible that were probably going to go on to become pastors or Bible scholars somewhere. They asked half of these students to prepare a short talk on employment opportunities for Bible students after graduation. They asked the other half of the students to prepare a talk on the story of the Good Samaritan. The students were told they would need to walk across the campus to another building in order to present their talk to another group of Bible students. Now, they introduced kind of a significant variable, though, into this experiment. Some of the presenters were told they were running late and they needed to hurry across campus. And some of them were told that they had plenty of time and they didn't need to hurry, they would be fine. So then these guys, these psychologists, they placed an actor. They hired an actor that they could place on the campus who appeared to have been mugged. And as each Bible study student made their way across the campus, they would encounter this guy slumped in an alley, head down, coughing and groaning. You know, just like our story, he was in desperate need of assistance. And the purpose of this experiment was to find out who would stop to help and why they would do it. One would assume, given the fact that these were Bible study students, and they would know this story very well, that they would hold to a very high standard of compassion and mercy, right? It would just make sense that all of them would stop because they knew the story. The results were stunning, however, and the biggest factor in this seemed to be time, whether or not they were in a hurry to get there to give a presentation or not. So 10% of those that were running late stopped to help the man in need. They actually had some of these students step over the man to get to that class to present a story on the Good Samaritan. Of the group who knew they had a few minutes to spare, 63% stopped to offer aid. So what this study suggests is that when we're hurried or rushed, it doesn't matter what we believe. It becomes all about us, our own selfishness. It exposed a group of people whose beliefs align with the concept of compassion and mercy. Yet when we have to get somewhere, when we have to do something, we put our own needs in front of others. You know, this simple study revealed a profound truth about really the current rhythm of many of our lives. We're too busy, we're too hurried, we're too rushed, we're overloaded, we're selfish. We've lost focus on what's really important, and that's loving others. You know, for many of us, our current pace of life leaves little room for us to really become ambassadors of love and agents of hope. Yet, Jesus tells us in this story that he came to meet the needs of the guy that was slumped in the alley, the guy whose head was down, coughing and groaning, the guy who was in desperate need of assistance. You know, from the story of the Good Samaritan, we learn 3 principles about loving our neighbor. That the lack of love is often easy to justify, right? I'm in too much of a hurry. Maybe that person's too drama. Maybe I even tell myself, I can't afford to help this person. You know, and none of those are ever right. The second thing that this story tells us is that our neighbor is anyone around us, whether race, creed, or social background, who is in need. And need is often not a financial need. It's almost always an emotional need. It's a conversation. It's a word of encouragement. It's an act of kindness. And the third thing this teaches us is that love means acting to meet a person's need. Where you live, needy people are close by. And that there's no good reason to refuse somebody help. Take the time. Get out of your comfort zone. Turn your neighborhood upside down. So I told you earlier that I was invited to be part of this group that was going to address the brokenness in our community. And we determined that the best way to do this is to love our neighbor. I mean, really love our neighbor, right? So when Amy and I started doing Jesus Was Homeless, that's when my life changed. I began to have a relationship with Jesus because I began to step out of my comfort zone. I began to love others. And I believe Gateway Branson Church is a church full of Samaritans. We are probably viewed by the community as the least likely ones to be making a difference. Because some of us are addicted. Some of us are broken and messy like me. Some of us might even be felons. Some of us, just fill in the blank, right? But I believe we're the very ones that Jesus came for. I believe Gateway Branson Church is the church that's supposed to lead the way. That we're the church full of Samaritans that can turn our community upside down. That we can be the example of the love of Jesus to our neighbor. But here's the deal. We've got to go out and practice really loving our neighbor. And we've got to apply the things we learn on Sundays to help us do that. But I believe this is our time. This is our opportunity to show the world who Jesus is. You know, let's not be a church of attenders. Let's be ambassadors of love. And when you do that, then Jesus will bring you rest and a life to the full. Now, we're going to start simple. I'm going to give you an assignment. Your assignment this week is to get to know your neighbor. So if you have somebody that lives to your left and right, if you're in a motel and you got a door on each side, your assignment is to just learn their name. First name, last name. That's it. It's real simple. Just learn their first name and last name. Now, if you already know your neighbor's first and last name, then go a little deeper. Find out if they have children. And if they have children, what are their kids' names? And if they don't have kids, start asking them questions. Be like Jesus. Ask lots of questions. Ask them where they came from. What brought them to Branson? You know, one of the things that I like to do is ask people what they do for fun. You know, what do you like to do for fun? And man, people will start engaging me in conversation. And here's the deal. Once you find out what they like to do and you can engage them in conversation just like Jesus, then you can begin to pray for them. And then you can begin to pray for them by name because you know them. What would it look like if Gateway Branson Church prayed for everyone they knew? Man, that's a powerful vision. So the band's going to come up here and they're going to sing some songs to God and for God and about God. And I want you to sing along, but if you don't know the words, we'll put the words up on the screen and you can sit, you can stand, whatever's comfortable. But I want you to pray during the first part of these songs and ask God to reveal to you who are the people that He wants you to have a relationship with. Who are your neighbors? I want you to kind of visualize in your head how you're going to have that conversation, how you're going to engage them. And then I want you to ask God this week to help you pray for them. We don't pass an offering bucket here. This is just our gift to you. You know, if Gateway's your church home and you want to help us reach more people and love our neighbors, man, we've got buckets in the back and you can help with that. There's going to be people up here to my left and right that would love to pray for you or maybe have you tell them who to pray for. Either way, you know, they want to pray. But man, I'm just excited. If we could just do that simple thing, I mean, I so believe this, that we could be the catalyst for change. And I know, man, when you look all throughout the Bible, it's all the messy people like us that Jesus used. And man, wouldn't that be exciting to think Gateway Branson Church is the example of loving their neighbor and changing the world. Man, let the love begin. Listen to the band.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hey, would y'all like to stand up with me if you feel comfortable? And let's sing to our Lord. He is an amazing, loving God.